I've always had a goal to hit 1,000 likes on a video, but you legends smashed past that and got one of my videos to over 2K likes. Let's break even more records on this video. Please smash that like button. And I want to try this one thing. I want to know who my devoted listeners are. So once you've done that, comment down below that you hit that like button hard, or even a kind message. Let's see who our loyal devoted viewers are. You know who you are. Once again, thank you guys so much. Now to these amazing stories. I met Inzi at this board game night someone from my kickboxing class invited me to. It was held in the back of a bubble tea cafe that looked like it hadn't been properly cleaned since 2018, but the vibe was kind of charming in a dusty, mismatched furniture kind of way. Inzi was tall, kind of lean but not too thin, and he had this smirk like he'd seen something hilarious right before walking in and was still thinking about it. He beat everyone at every game without being smug, which somehow made him more smug. When he asked me if I wanted to grab dinner later that week, I said sure. Not because sparks flew or anything like that. More like I was curious what someone that confident had to say when he wasn't holding fake currency and building cities. He picked this Turkish spot downtown. I remember the lights were so low that I had to squint to read the menu, and everything was draped in tapestries, like the inside of a very intense aunt's living room. The waiter brought us bread with yogurt sauce and some red stuff that I think was crushed pepper and oil, and it was honestly the best part of the night. We talked about work, family, a little about traveling. I told him about the time I got stranded in Iceland because of a snowstorm, and he laughed in that soft, half-interested way where you know someone's listening but also kind of waiting to speak. He leaned back in his chair around the time our mains came out. I had lamb and rice. He had some stew that looked like it had cooked for 8 hours and honestly smelled better than mine. He started telling me about his last relationship, which already had me raising mental red flags because why are we unpacking X stuff 30 minutes into kebabs? I didn't interrupt. I figured maybe he needed to get it off his chest or something. He said it ended about a year ago. They were together for a little over 2 years. At first, it sounded like one of those mutual breakups where nobody's really to blame and everyone just drifts into separate orbits. But then he said, and I swear he dropped this while picking through his stew like it was the most casual detail ever, that during their last 6 months together, he started tracking her location. I blinked. I thought you meant it like jokingly. Like maybe he was one of those people who overuses life 360 or something and they were both on it. But nope. He clarified quickly, said he put an app on her phone after she left it at his apartment. Didn't even flinch when he said it. He said he only did it because she had started acting weird, like going out more, not texting back right away, taking walks alone. I asked if she knew about it, and he shook his head while still chewing. She would have made a big deal, he said, like that was a bad thing. I laughed, out of shock, mostly. I didn't know what else to do. My brain was trying to catch up with the words I had just heard. Then, like he was topping off an already insane story, he added that he still checks her social media every single day. Not in a bitter or sad way, just as part of his routine. Like brushing teeth. He knew who she was dating now, where she had gone for brunch last weekend, what book she was reading. I think he even mentioned her sister's new haircut. At this point, I was mostly just trying not to physically slide out of the booth. There was something surreal about how normal he made it all sound. Like I was a weird one for thinking this was weird. I excused myself to go to the bathroom mostly just to breathe. The bathroom had this mirror that was foggy and cracked at the corner, and I stared at myself for a good minute wondering how the hell I ended up there, listening to a guy tell me about his digital surveillance skills over lamb and saffron rice. I thought about texting my friend to call me with an emergency, but decided I could just sit through the rest of dinner and never respond to him again. When I got back, he was on his phone, probably looking at his ex's Instagram story for all I knew. He smiled like nothing had happened and asked if I wanted to share dessert. I said I was full, which was a lie. I just couldn't imagine spooning into chocolate pudding next to a man who had committed actual felony-level creepy behavior and was openly proud of it. The waiter brought the check, and Imzi offered to split it. I paid my half and left a tip. He walked me to the train station and asked if I wanted to do this again sometime. I said I'd let him know, which we both knew meant no. When I got home, I blocked him on everything I could think of, even LinkedIn, just in case. The next day, I deleted the number, but part of me kept wondering if he had screenshot our text convo, or if there was some app I didn't know about where he could still see what neighborhood I was in. I turned off location sharing on everything for the next week just to be safe. And the worst part, he never once thought it was wrong. Not the tracking, not the lurking, not the way he inserted it into dinner like it was trivia. Just straight up shared it like he was talking about a vacation he took once. And I think that's what really messed with me. I met Halima at this rooftop bar my friend dragged me to on a random Thursday night. I wasn't even supposed to go out, I had work early the next day, and I was wearing the kind of outfit that screamed ran errands and gave up halfway through. But Halima was there, sitting alone near the ledge with a drink that looked expensive and dangerous, and she was honestly hard to ignore. She had this look like she knew people were watching her, but she didn't care enough to react. Long black hair, gold hoop earrings, and a way of scanning the room that made you feel like she was choosing which character in the room was worth engaging with. She ended up talking to me first. I was waiting for my friend near the bar when she leaned over and said something about how my drink looked like it was mixed by someone who hates alcohol. It was a gin and tonic, and yeah, it did taste like sparkling water pretending to be interesting. We laughed, she clinked her glass against mine, and we ended up standing there for way longer than I expected. Eventually, she asked if I wanted to grab another round at a quieter spot nearby. She said rooftop bars were fun for like 10 minutes and then just turned into expensive wind tunnels. I agreed partly because she was genuinely cool to talk to, and partly because there was something weirdly compelling about her. She felt like the kind of person who'd either ruin your week or make it unforgettable. We went to this dive, a little bar that had a wall of vinyl records and booths that looked like they'd seen more breakups than birthday parties. The music was low, the lighting was reddish and warm, and she ordered whiskey neat like someone who didn't need a mixer to soften the blow. We talked about bad dates and weird jobs, and she told me about how she once got fired from a boutique because she made fun of a customer's dog sweater. It was going pretty well. She had this way of talking where it felt like she was letting you in on a secret, like everything she said was slightly confidential even if it wasn't. But then, about halfway through her second drink, she dropped something that just hung there. She said she'd just gotten out of a long relationship. I nodded, not thinking much of it, until she added that she left the guy after he got diagnosed with cancer. At first, I thought she meant it in a tragic way, like maybe it was too painful or something. But she took another sip, stared at the wall behind me like she was trying to remember if she paid a parking ticket, and then said flat out, "Yeah, I just wasn't into being a nurse, you know." I didn't respond right away because I wasn't sure I heard her correctly, but she kept talking like she just admitted she didn't like camping or something. She said he got diagnosed, and at first, she stuck around because she thought it would pass or be manageable. But then it got messy. Those were her exact words. Messy. Doctor appointments, emotional breakdowns, meds on the counter, hospital smelling his clothes. She said it made her feel like her life was becoming someone else's, like she was getting absorbed into his world of illness, and she didn't sign up for that. I think I made a face without realizing it because she laughed and said she'd told the same story to a friend who didn't talk to her for a month after. Then she shrugged and said, "I'd rather be honest than fake sympathy," like that was supposed to make it better. She said she didn't ghost him or anything. She had a full conversation, explained how she wasn't emotionally equipped for the situation, and left clean. That was the word she used. Clean. Like she'd taken off gloves and thrown them in the trash. No loose ends. No dramatic text chains. Just done. And then, because apparently she wasn't finished turning this into a human morality test, she told me she didn't regret it. Not even a little bit. She said she checked his Instagram a couple times out of curiosity and saw that he was doing better now, maybe even dating someone new. She was happy for him, she said, and then asked me if I thought that made her a bad person. I just kind of looked at her and said I didn't really know, which was true. Part of me was thinking, okay, at least she didn't fake it. At least she didn't cheat or lie or slowly make him miserable until he broke up with her first. But another part of me was screaming inside because how do you leave someone at their lowest and just move on like it's a job you weren't vibing with? The rest of the night fell off after that. We finished our drinks, but the vibe was gone. I wasn't sure what to say without sounding like I was judging her, and she didn't seem like the type who'd take judgment lightly. She paid her tab in cash, tucked her card into a wallet that looked like it cost more than my monthly groceries, and said it was nice meeting me. Then she walked out like she'd never been there at all. I sat there for a few more minutes after she left, just turning the whole thing over in my head. It wasn't even about her anymore. It was about the fact that people like that exist. People who can calculate emotion like math, who can leave someone mid-crisis and still sleep at night, And not only that, but tell the story over drinks with a smile and no shame. So this one started on a random Tuesday when I had nothing better to do than swipe on dating apps while reheating leftover pasta and watching a show I wasn't even really paying attention to. Tyrone messaged me first. His profile said he was a creative consultant, which could mean anything from making logos to selling NFTs. But he looked cute in a very put together, jeans that actually fit kind of way. His messages were short but funny, like sarcastic without being mean. And he used proper punctuation, which shouldn't matter, but it does. We talked for about a week before he suggested grabbing a drink, and I figured, sure, why not? He said he knew a chill spot with good music and zero crowds, which sounded a little too much like a basement with a Bluetooth speaker, but I went with it. He offered to drive, which normally I'd say no to, but he made a point of saying he didn't drink much, and honestly, I just didn't feel like Ubering across town. When we pulled up, I was expecting something quiet and kind of classy based on how he described it. Instead, we parked in front of this divey-looking bar with no sign, just a single red light hanging above the door like some weird haunted brothel. Inside, it smelled like lemon cleaner and fryer grease, and the lighting was dimmed in a way that felt accidental, like they'd been meaning to fix the bulbs but forgot. The crowd was older, lots of regulars, and there was a jukebox that only played 90s country for some reason. Tyrone walked in like he owned the place. A couple people nodded at him, and a bartender, this woman with a messy bun and half a sleeve of tattoos, just stared at him when we came in. I remember thinking it was weird they didn't smile or anything, like there was a whole conversation happening behind their eyes that I wasn't invited to. We sat at a booth near the back, and I ordered a vodka soda. He got a ginger ale. We started talking about music, mostly stuff we both hated, and for a second it felt pretty normal. He was definitely smooth, but not in an annoying way. Like he wasn't trying too hard. He made fun of my choice in shoes. They were ugly, he was right, and I gave him crap for saying he doesn't watch movies longer than 2 hours. It was going fine. Then the bartender came over. She didn't even greet us, just asked if we were ready to order more drinks. Her voice was clipped, like she'd smoked too many cigarettes and had zero patience left in life. Tyrone said he'd be right back and asked her if they could talk real quick, and she just gave him this look like she'd already been expecting it. And then they left. I watched them disappear into this back hallway that led toward what I assume was the office or maybe a storage room. Either way, they were gone. At first, I thought it was gonna be 5 minutes tops. Maybe something about a tap or some old friend stuff. But 5 minutes turned into 10, then 20. I finished my drink and started looking around like I was waiting for a friend who stood me up. I didn't want to check my phone too much and look desperate, but I also didn't want to just sit there staring at the jukebox while Shania Twain told me she didn't impress easily. At 30 minutes, I got up and asked the guy at the bar if he knew where the bartender went. He laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Oh, they're probably catching up." It's been a while since he showed his face around here, which sounded way more loaded than I wanted it to be. When Tyrone finally came back, he looked totally unfazed. Sat back down, adjusted his jacket, took a sip of his untouched ginger ale, and asked if I wanted another round. I straight up asked him where he went and what that was about. He kind of smiled into his glass and said, "Oh, that's my ex-wife. We had some things to clear up." That sentence just dropped it like he was telling me he forgot to buy milk. I blinked at him for a second and asked him to repeat it. Yep, ex-wife. Not ex-girlfriend, not fling. They were married. For 6 years, apparently. Got divorced last summer. And this was her bar. Like she owned the place. And he thought this would be a chill first date location. I didn't even know where to begin. I asked why he didn't mention that before we showed up, and he said he didn't think it mattered. Said they were cool now and that the conversation in the back was just some final closure stuff. I asked if that couldn't have been handled literally any other night besides the one we were on a date, and he just shrugged like I was overreacting. At that point, I was just exhausted. I had spent the past half hour making awkward eye contact with drunk strangers while my date emotionally debriefed with his ex in a storage room. And now he was acting like I should just slide back into flirty conversation like it never happened. I told him I was gonna head out. He offered to drive me home, but I said I'd rather Uber. He nodded and said no hard feelings, like he was doing me a favor by being cool about it. On the way out, the bartender, his ex, watched me like she'd seen this whole thing play out before, Honestly, maybe she had. Amy messaged me first on this dating app I almost deleted twice that week. I remember her opener was a joke about the menu font at a ramen place we both liked. It wasn't even that funny, but it was specific and not some dead, hey, or what of nonsense, so I answered. She had one of those profiles that felt like she actually tried. Good lighting, not too many filters, a little sarcastic. Her bio said she was into true crime, matcha, and knowing when to leave. That last part seemed cool at the time. In hindsight, maybe a bit ominous. We talked for like 4 days. She replied quick, didn't overdo emojis, and didn't try to pretend she was cooler than she was. So I suggested sushi, something casual. She picked this place on the edge of downtown, one of those spots that doesn't look like much from the outside, but has neon signs inside and a weird obsession with anime playlists. It was kind of loud, kind of awkward, but somehow fit the vibe. She showed up early, already halfway through a bowl of edamame by the time I arrived. Black turtleneck, long tan coat, hair tucked behind one ear. Chill, stylish, nothing flashy. She smiled a lot, but not the fake kind of smiling. Like she really just found things interesting. She asked a ton of questions about me, childhood, random injuries, worst car I ever drove, and I answered all of them without thinking twice. It didn't feel like an interrogation. It felt like she actually cared. Midway through the salmon rolls, she leaned in slightly and told me she had something kind of weird to share. Her voice dropped just enough that I knew this wasn't gonna be about a food allergy. She said she records all her dates, like video records. Not audio, not journaling afterward, actual video. She pointed at her bag, and I saw this little lens poking out through what I now realized was a weirdly placed grommet on the side. She said it was a camera, and it had been recording since I sat down. I blinked, then half laughed because I honestly thought she was joking. She wasn't. She pulled out her phone, tapped through an app, and showed me the live feed. There I was, eating tempura, blinking at her like someone who just realized their entire night was being live streamed to an unknown storage cloud. I asked her why. She said it was for safety. Straight up, like it was obvious. She didn't trust people, and she liked having a record. Not for blackmail or content or anything gross, just in case something ever happened. She said you never really know who you're sitting across from. I mean, she's not wrong, but also, what? She wasn't even apologetic about it. She said she tells most people around the second or third date, but sometimes earlier she gets a read. Apparently, I had that kind of face. I wasn't sure if I should be offended or flattered. She pulled out a folder on her phone labeled Encounters, which already sounded like an FBI folder, and started scrolling through thumbnails of past dinners, coffees, rooftop hangouts. There were dozens of them, labeled by first name and location. Marcus, brunch. Flatiron, Devon, coffee, greenhouse. Leo, wine bar, rainy night. It was like watching someone flip through security footage of their love life. She didn't look embarrassed at all. In fact, she looked a little proud, like she had created her own weird little dating museum. She asked if it made me uncomfortable. I said a little, and she nodded like she expected that answer. Then she went on to explain how one guy she dated freaked out and left the second she told him, and another guy was totally into it and even asked for the footage. Apparently, people are either deeply uncomfortable or kinda intrigued. I guess I was in the first group. I asked her what she did with the videos when the date went bad. She said she usually kept them, just in case the guy ever popped back up or something sketchy happened later. People forget what they say when they think nobody's watching, she said, while sipping her miso soup like she hadn't just admitted to building her own personal NSA. I tried to move on from the conversation, but honestly, the vibe was dead. I kept wondering if she'd rewatch this later or analyze my body language like some armchair psychologist. I suddenly felt like I couldn't touch my drink without wondering how it looked on camera. Were my answers too long? Was I chewing weird? She didn't seem to notice. She asked if I wanted dessert. I lied and said I was full, even though I was eyeing the mochi from the moment we sat down. I paid for my half, and she thanked me in this super polite way that made it feel like we were wrapping up a business lunch. Outside the restaurant, she asked if I wanted to go for a walk, and I said I had an early morning. She nodded, gave me this tight-lipped smile like she'd already made her mind up about me, and said, "All right, take care." And then she just walked off into the streetlight glow, coat swinging behind her, like some secret agent with a romantic side hustle. When I got home, I kept thinking about that folder. I pictured my name joining the archive, Alex Sushi, Neon Anime Place. Just another file in her personal vault. I don't think I've ever felt so weird about someone who technically didn't do anything wrong, but still felt like she crossed some line I didn't even know was there until she stepped over it. This one started out normal. Painfully normal, honestly. I met Adolf on Hinge, where his bio had a picture of him holding a guitar he probably didn't play and something about how real connection greater than endless swiping. I rolled my eyes, but still liked his photo because he was kind of cute and had a "this guy owns a plant and reads" vibe. He messaged me something about my favorite movie, and we exchanged the usual flurry of fake deep questions about passions and travel dreams before landing on a plan to get dinner. He picked this new Italian place that had just opened in that part of town where you can never find parking and every building is either an art gallery or an overpriced sandwich shop. He said he'd been wanting to try it, and I figured, hey, if someone else wants to navigate the reservation chaos, let them. We met outside around 7, and the second I saw him, I had a weird feeling. Not bad exactly, just like something was a little off. He was wearing this turtleneck that looked stiff enough to stand up by itself, and he had those small round glasses that make some people look mysterious and others look like they collect bones for fun. His smile was kind of tight, like it was practiced in the mirror. Anyway, we went and got seated, and things started off all right. He was polite, asked questions, complimented the server's pronunciation of the specials. He made a couple slightly try-hard jokes about how people don't talk anymore, and how modern dating is just two people interviewing each other while pretending not to. Which, okay, true, but also relax. You're not the first person to discover the concept of social awkwardness. We ordered wine, split some burrata, then he got this massive seafood pasta while I ordered gaki and immediately regretted it because it came in this sad little puddle of cream sauce. We talked about college, ex-roommates, bad vacations. He went on a 5-minute rant about how sunscreen is a scam and we should be closer to nature, which I let slide because I was too hungry to argue and also kind of wanted to see how deep that rabbit hole went. Deep, apparently. But whatever. I've had weirder dates. The food was decent and the wine was solid, and he didn't check his phone once. So I was like, cool, we'll finish up. Maybe go for a short walk, and then I'll call it a night. And then the check came. The server dropped it off, smiled, and walked away. I reached into my bag without even thinking about it, just instinct. I always offer to split, not because I think I should, but because I hate that awkward pause where both people are just waiting to see who makes the first move. And right as I was pulling out my card, he stopped me. He leaned back in his chair, pushed the bill toward himself, and said, "I don't split." I raised an eyebrow and said, "Oh, okay," thinking maybe just like covering first dates. Some people do, but then he kept talking. Of course he did. He said, "Yeah, I don't really believe in splitting bills with women. It's just not how I see things." I tried to figure out what he meant by that. Was this his weird attempt at being traditional? But no, he clarified. Because of course he did. That he didn't split because, in his words, women already earned emotional currency just by showing up. I thought he was joking. I stared at him, waiting for a smirk, a wink, a "just messing with you." Nothing. He was dead serious. He said women get value from the emotional labor men do to impress them, and that men spend time, energy, and resources preparing for dates, while women just arrive and get attention handed to them. So in his mind, paying the bill was just evening the scales. He even used that exact phrase, evening the scales. I sat there in silence for a second, mostly because I didn't trust myself not to laugh in his face. He looked so pleased with his own explanation, like he just solved gender politics in under 2 minutes at a mid-range Italian place. I asked him if he actually thought that made sense or if he just wanted to say something edgy. He doubled down, said it was economic balance, that most women don't even remember the names of half the guys who buy them dinner. He was at least being transparent about the exchange. I had no idea how to respond to that. My brain was trying to process the fact that I was being told mid-pasta digestion that my presence was some kind of emotional tax benefit. I let him pay. Not because I agreed, but because at that point, I was just ready to be done. I wanted to go home, take my bra off, and tell the group chat everything. As we walked outside, he asked if I wanted to come back to his place for tea. He said it like he thought it was subtle, and I told him I had work early. He looked disappointed but not surprised, which made me think this probably happened a lot. I thanked him for dinner, said goodnight, and walked the opposite direction even though my car was parked the other way. I didn't want him knowing which car was mine. On the way home, I kept thinking about that phrase, emotional currency, like I'd just shown up and cashed a check made of compliments and eye contact. Like the price of a meal could be traded for my time and attention, and that somehow in his head, this all made sense. Okay, so Ellie. I met her at a plant swap in someone's backyard that I went to mostly because I was bored, and my friend said there'd be free kombucha and snacks. She was standing near a little table with spider plants and baby pothos cuttings, wearing this oversized denim jacket and a bandana tied around her ponytail like she was in a Netflix reboot of an indie gardening show. She had this big open smile and a voice that sounded like it came with a filter, like every sentence she said was just naturally softer and sweeter than it needed to be. We hit it off pretty quick. She offered me a baby monstera and made fun of how I didn't know what sphagnum moss was. Her energy was weirdly calm, like someone who reads books about attachment styles and actually finishes them. By the end of the event, we were sitting on the grass with a couple other people, and she asked if I wanted to get brunch sometime. I said yeah. It felt like the kind of thing that would be easy and mellow, and honestly, I hadn't been on a solid date in a while. She picked this quirky little diner tucked in between two yoga studios. Everything inside was yellow and chrome, and all the waiters wore fake 1950s Toyota jerk hats for some reason. We sat in a booth that had duct tape on the seat, but in a way that felt deliberate, like it was part of the vibe. Ellie ordered something called a psychedelic omelette and asked if I liked my parents. It wasn't even 5 minutes into the date. I laughed. Guess who asked that straight out the gate? But she was serious. I told her, yeah, my parents were decent, nothing too dramatic. Then I asked her the same thing, and she smiled real wide and said, my dad is literally my favorite person in the world. I figured she just meant they were close. Some people are like that. Dads who go to your school plays and teach you how to parallel park. Cool. But then she kept going. She started telling me all these oddly specific details about her dad. His job, what cologne he wears, how he makes popcorn on the stove every Friday night. She talked about him like he was this mythical creature who could do no wrong. I nodded through it, waiting for the conversation to loop back to something less intense. But it didn't. She started describing how her dad looked. Beard, strong jaw, deep voice, laugh that rumbles like a train. And I remember thinking it sounded weirdly familiar. Too familiar. Then she pulled out her phone. Mid-pancake. Just reached into her tote bag, unlocked her phone, and said, okay, this might sound weird, but I want to show you something. I braced myself for memes or maybe a weird tattoo. No. She opened a folder on her phone, literally labeled Dad Hypes, and showed me a series of side-by-side photos. On one side of each screen, a photo of her dad, usually him doing something aggressively normal like grilling or sitting on a porch holding a beer. On the other side, a photo of a guy she dated. Same beard style, same dark hair. One even had the same dumb white sneakers. She laughed like it was a fun party trick. Said she started noticing it in college, that every guy she went for had some version of her dad's look. Not just physically either. She liked guys who were a little stern, practical, gave off dad energy. She said she found comfort in familiarity and that it wasn't that deep, just a pattern. I was literally in the middle of chewing toast while processing all this. Like, okay, sure, some people date their type. Some people have a thing for tall guys or guitar guys or guys who know obscure cheeses. But having a whole photo archive of exes compared to your father, that's a level of self-awareness I wasn't prepared for. She asked me if I saw it too, like if I saw the resemblance between the photos. I honestly did, which made it worse. I nodded slowly, not wanting to lie, but also deeply unsure of where this was all going. Then she said, I swear I am not exaggerating. I think you might be one of the closest matches. I put my fork down. She smiled, all innocent like she had just complimented my shoes. I didn't even know how to respond. I was about to start asking questions like, what's your dad's middle name? Or do we have the same taste in barbecue sauce? Because I didn't want to know. I didn't want to be the main image in her next side-by-side comparison. I asked her if she thought that was healthy, just straight up. She looked genuinely confused. Said she didn't see the problem. That her dad was the most emotionally stable man she'd ever met, and why wouldn't she want someone like him? I said something about individuality and not just cloning the past, but she brushed it off and said she'd been in therapy and her therapist didn't think it was a red flag, just a preference. By the time we finished eating, I felt like I was in a weird audition I didn't sign up for. I paid for my food and we walked out. She asked if I wanted to go to a bookstore nearby. I said I had to meet a friend. She nodded and said, "Well, this was nice," and gave me a hug that lasted a beat too long. When I got home, I pulled up the group chat and just typed, "Date went great. I'm her dad now." I was halfway through a weird stretch of dating where everyone seemed to be either emotionally unavailable or way too available. Jared seemed like the middle ground. His profile said single dad, which I clocked right away, not a deal breaker, just something to be aware of. He had that messy but charming thing going on, all stubble and thrifted jackets, and in his pictures he always looked like he was mid-conversation. I like that. We talked for a couple weeks before meeting up. He seemed normal, actually funny. Like, not just ha funny, but someone who could carry a joke and didn't make everything about himself. He said he had a son, but didn't really bring him up much except to say they were close. I figured he had babysitting lined up, or, wouldn't bring him to the first date. He picked this casual pizza place that had those thin crust slices the size of your head and boots made of sticky red vinyl. Classic, we agreed on an early dinner because he said he had some stuff to handle later, which I assumed meant kids' stuff. When I got there, I spotted him right away, standing by the soda fountain, holding 2 paper cups, and next to him was a kid in a giant hoodie holding a slice of pepperoni like it had personally offended him. My stomach dropped a little. I was already walking toward them when it hit me that this wasn't going to be the date I thought I was walking into. He smiled when he saw me like nothing was weird. No apology, no warning text. Just, "Hey, this is Miles," like he was introducing me to his roommate, not his 8-year-old child who would now be joining our candleless romantic outing. I froze for a second, and then forced a smile and waved. Miles gave me that blank stare kids give when they know they have more power than adults are comfortable admitting. He didn't say hi, just slurped Sprite loudly and turned back toward the booth. Jared followed him and gestured for me to sit across from them like this was all going great. I sat down and tried to act like I wasn't spiraling. I asked, very casually, I thought, if everything was okay. And he said, "Yeah, his mom had to switch weekends, so I figured why cancel? Like this was a group hang and not a date where I might have shaved my legs for no reason." The server came and Jared ordered 3 slices and a basket of garlic knots like we were there for Little League post-game pizza. Miles immediately asked if he could get extra cheese and started kicking the booth. Jared just nodded like this was all chill. I tried to start a little small talk with Miles, asked if he liked school or sports or whatever, and he stared at me and said, "You talk weird." Jared laughed. I didn't. Then came the food. We're barely 2 bites in when Miles starts pulling the cheese off his slice and flinging it onto the table, like not one piece, drips. Long, stringy trails of mozzarella being draped over the salt shaker, thrown onto napkins, even one that somehow landed on Jared's sleeve. I kept expecting him to step in. Say something. Anything. He didn't. He just looked at me and said, "He's a little wild today." I laughed weakly like I didn't want to say what I was thinking, which was that his son was currently building a cheese sculpture and nobody was stopping him. Then Miles picked up a garlic knot and chucked it across the table. It bounced off my plate and rolled onto the booth seat. Jared just turned to him and said, "Dude," in this half-hearted way like he dropped a spoon or something. I looked at Jared and said, "Hey, maybe he needs a break or something," trying to suggest that, maybe he needed to step in and parent. Jared sighed and then, this is the part I'll never forget, looked at me and said, "You're better with kids than me. Could you just talk to him?" I thought he was joking. I laughed again, thinking he was being sarcastic. But no, he was dead serious. He actually wanted me, someone his kid just met, to discipline his son while he sat there doing literally nothing. I blinked at him, then at Miles, who was now stacking croutons from the salad bar into a small tower on the ketchup bottle. I said, "I don't really think that's my place," which was the calmest possible version of what I was feeling. Jared shrugged and said, "I just figured it'd be good for him to see me date again. I didn't know what to say to that. I was chewing on a crust and thinking about my life choices. I wanted to ask if he even told Miles what this was. Like, did the kid know his dad was on a date, or did he think I was some friend who just really likes overpaying for fountain soda? The rest of the meal was a blur of chaotic kid energy and awkward silence. Miles tried to drink ketchup at one point. Jared said nothing. I was sweating and hadn't even touched half my food. I gave up and said I needed to head out early. Jared looked mildly surprised but not disappointed. He said, "No worries, we'll do a proper one next time." Next time. I said, "Yeah, totally," and got out of there so fast I forgot to grab my leftover slice. I sat in my car for a solid 5 minutes just processing what had happened. I didn't blame the kid. He was 8. He didn't ask to be dragged into some pizza-themed social experiment. But Jared, whole different story. He texted me later saying Miles really liked me and that he could see us doing family stuff together easy. I didn't respond. Blocked his number, deleted the app, and took a break from dating for a few days, maybe weeks. Lena was one of those matches that felt like it came out of nowhere. I wasn't even in the mood to swipe that day. I was in my bed, eating dry cereal out of the box, avoiding my to-do list and spiraling about nothing in particular, when her profile popped up. She looked grounded. I don't know how else to describe it. Her photos were calm. No bikinis, no weird grouped shots where you have to play guess, just pictures of her with plants, standing in front of a mural, one where she was holding a coffee and smiling like someone just told her a good secret. Her bio said former therapist, current book hoarder, lover of slow mornings, and I was like, okay, cool. Feels safe. Feels kind of grown. We started talking that night. She asked good questions, didn't just mirror everything I said, and seemed like she actually thought before she typed. Her voice messages sounded like a podcast. Soft, clear, paced like someone who never had to fight to be heard. We made plans to get coffee at this indie place that somehow only plays vinyl records and serves everything on mismatched plates. It was raining that day, not in a sad way, but in that cozy, stay and rethink your life kind of way. I showed up early and tried not to look like I cared. Lana walked in 5 minutes later in this giant coat that looked like it could double as a blanket with a bag full of books, and no umbrella, just damp curls and confidence. The first 30 minutes of the date were genuinely nice, like scary nice. She was easy to talk to, asked about things beyond the surface, told me I had steady eyes, whatever that means, and actually listened to my answers instead of just waiting for her turn to talk. She sipped her tea slowly and told me stories about her grad school years, about working in clinics, about how rewarding and exhausting it was to be a therapist. She talked about burnout and the feeling of holding other people's pain so much that it starts to leak into your own. At one point I said something like, "It must be tough to step away from that line of work," and she paused. Like, really paused. Set her cup down, adjusted her sleeve, took a breath. Then she said, "Yeah, well, I didn't really step away. More like I got pushed." That changed the whole energy. She smiled, not embarrassed, but like she'd told the story enough times to be numb to it, and said, "I actually lost my license." I sat up straighter, trying not to look shocked. I asked her what happened, trying to keep my tone casual, like she'd just said she'd failed a driving test or something. She told me there was a situation with a former client, a guy she had been seeing for therapy. She didn't say what the sessions were for, just that they had emotional overlap, and it got complicated. I didn't want to pry, but she just kept going. She said there was a moment, something that blurred boundaries, and that she reported it herself. But once the board got involved, it was over. License revoked. No appeal. Then she leaned in and said, "I still think I helped him more than I hurt him." I didn't know what to do with that. She wasn't saying it like she regretted it. She was saying it like we were two people who might understand each other better because of this. I tried to nod, but I think my face did something else because she cocked her head and asked me, "Have you ever been in therapy?" I said yeah, because I have. A few times. Nothing dramatic. Some anxiety stuff, one heartbreak that hit harder than I expected, the usual. She smiled and said, "You seem like someone who's done the work." Which sounds like a compliment but felt a little weird coming from someone who had just admitted to losing her job over boundary crossing with a client. Like, was I being assessed? Was this part of her process? Had she mentally filed me under emotionally literate, possible second chance? She started talking about how most people just walk around pretending to be fine when really they're just scared or ashamed or carrying old grief in their shoulders. I nodded along, but there was a part of me that couldn't stop circling back to the fact that she had once blurred the lines so badly it cost her an entire career. I asked if she ever thought about going back to it. She said no, that once something like that happens, it sticks to you. People don't want to hear your side. They just want to put you in a box. Violator, rule breaker, unsafe. Her words, not mine. Then she said something that stuck with me. She said, I've always felt more connected to people I shouldn't get close to. She said it like a confession, like I was supposed to see her differently after that. I just kind of sat there, sipping lukewarm coffee and trying to figure out if I was now one of those people. She didn't seem predatory or anything. Just loose with the rules, like someone who thought connection was more important than context, which sounds nice until it's not. After another 15 minutes, I said I had to get going. She hugged me, longer than I expected, and said I was easy to sit with. I said thanks like a weirdo and walked out into the rain thinking about how she probably used to say that kind of thing to clients too. She texted me that night, saying she had a nice time and asking if I'd want to do something more open-ended next time. I didn't answer. Not because I thought she was dangerous or anything, but because something about it all just felt slippery, like I was already part of something without agreeing to it. This guy, Max, was one of those guys who messaged with way too much energy right from the jump. Like he'd send 3 texts before I even replied to the first one, full of questions like, what's your love language? Or, are you more a morning sunlight or midnight rain type of person? Like, chill. You don't have to come in like a BuzzFeed quiz. But he was consistent and honestly kind of charming. He sent voice notes, not creepy ones. More like observations about people watching in a park or his coworker who wore fake glasses for aesthetic. It was giving slightly too online, but I figured I'd give him a shot. We planned to meet at this cafe/bookstore that's mostly just vibes. Like mismatched furniture, old jazz records playing, lats with cinnamon foam and mugs that feel stolen from someone's grandma. He beat me there and already had a table. He stood when I walked in, which was weirdly polite, and greeted me like we were old friends. Hugged me like we'd known each other in a past life. Normally that might have been too much, but I wasn't mad at it. The date started off actually kind of great. He was easy to talk to, quick to laugh, and remembered small details I'd told him in messages. He told me about how he used to work in A, but hated office politics, so now he freelances doing tech support for emotionally complicated people, whatever that means. We joked about terrible dating stories, made fun of the menu that had like 7 variations of oat milk, and it was smooth for a while. Too smooth, maybe. Somewhere around hour 2, he started asking questions that felt a little layered. Like, what's your biggest secret no one knows about you? Or do you ever lie to people you love just to keep them calm? I laughed him off, gave non-committal answers, and tried to steer it toward lighter stuff, but he didn't drop it. Then came the phone thing. He said he wanted to show me this meme his friend sent him, but his phone had died. I offered to just look it up on mine. That wasn't good enough for him. He laughed, real casual, and said, just unlock your phone for a sec. I'll find it. I didn't move. I kind of smiled like, no, and said I prefer to just do it myself. I picked up my phone and opened Google while he sat back and just stared at me. His whole vibe shifted. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked genuinely confused, like I'd broken an unspoken rule. Then he said, dead serious. Why don't you trust me? I blinked. We'd known each other for literally 2 hours. I told him it wasn't about trust, it was just a boundary. And he went quiet for a second before saying, boundaries are just walls people build to protect their secrets. If we're really connecting, why would we need walls? I honestly thought he was doing a bit, like some parody of a guy who read too many self-help books out of context. But no, he meant it. He started talking about how real connection requires total openness. No privacy. No hidden corners. That secrets were a form of lying, and that people who don't share everything are emotionally unavailable. And when I told him I didn't think anyone should have full access to anyone else's stuff, especially not phones, he looked at me like I was trying to hide a murder confession. He actually said, if you're not doing anything wrong, why would it matter? I laughed. I couldn't help it. That's the logic of every controlling ex-boyfriend and creepy boss rolled into one sentence. I asked him if he expected everyone he dated to just hand over their phone in the first meeting, and he said, no, just the ones I'm serious about. which is wild considering we had just finished our first shared pastry and were still figuring out how each other took coffee. Then came the kicker. He asked if I'd been burned before, and said that maybe I had trust wounds I wasn't healed from yet. Like I was the one being irrational. Like my unwillingness to give him my passcode meant I was emotionally stunted. At that point, I just sat back, nodded, and said I should probably head out. He looked frustrated, but tried to cover it with his calm, therapist-y voice like, "Well, I hope you learn to let people in eventually." I smiled, said best of luck, and walked out without looking back. On the way home, he texted me, no joke, "You'll never find real love behind a locked phone screen." I didn't reply. I blocked him before I even finished crossing the street. It's wild how fast some people flip when they don't get instant intimacy. Like they think a couple decent jokes and a latte means they're entitled to every part of you. Meanwhile, I'm just trying to drink overpriced espresso without being dragged into a cult of radical transparency. Kayla was one of those people who looked like she belonged in a movie about people who go to farmers markets on purpose. Her pictures had a lot of oversized sweaters, chipped nail polish, coffee cups, held with both hands. She had a nose ring, a bookshelf in the background of every photo, and captions like listening to Mitski and feeling alive again. I'm not even gonna lie, I was into it. She gave off cool barista who secretly has a screenplay energy. We matched after midnight on a Sunday, which is usually a red flag time for dating apps, but our combo didn't feel like a desperation scroll. She asked good questions, talked about how much she hated the word hubby, and even sent me a playlist after like 3 hours. I didn't even listen to it, but felt thoughtful. I asked if she wanted to grab a drink, and she suggested this little bar behind a record shop that I'd never even heard of. I should have known from that alone that things were about to be weird. We met up on a Thursday night. It was raining, of course, because dates like this don't happen under normal weather. The bar was dim, cozy, smelled like cider and expensive gin. There were only 5 people inside, and all of them looked like they wrote poetry at least once a week. Kayla showed up in a long jacket and Doc Martens and smiled like we were already in on a secret together. We ordered drinks. She got some smoky bourbon thing, and I got a cider because I'm not trying to impress anyone with my tolerance. And we grabbed a booth in the corner. Conversation was honestly solid. We talked about horrible bosses, band breakups, the weird overlap between astrology people and crypto people. She was smart, sharp, and actually listened instead of waiting to talk. But about 40 minutes in, we started talking about living situations. I made some joke about my landlord being missing half the time, and she laughed and said, "At least you don't live with your ex." I paused, blinked. She just sipped her drink like it was nothing. I asked her to run that back real quick, and she nodded like, "Oh yeah, I still live with my ex-fiance." I thought she meant temporarily, like just until the lease ended or something. But no, she meant this was the setup. Full time. Ongoing. She said they'd broken up 8 months ago, but decided to keep the apartment because it was rent stabilized and close to the good Thai place. Like that somehow made cohabitating with your former future husband a quirky life hack instead of a red flag. I asked how that worked logistically. She said they had separate bedrooms, but sometimes fell asleep on the same couch, and sometimes in the same bed if it's cold. And she laughed. And yeah, sometimes we still sleep together, but only when neither of us is seeing anyone. I'm pretty sure my brain short-circuited right there in the booth. I just stared at her for a second like she told me she occasionally shares a toothbrush with a raccoon. She kept talking like it was just a regular Tuesday, said they were better as roommates than lovers, and that they communicate really well now. She said the physical stuff was comfort-based and not emotional, like they'd both outgrown the drama and just needed human contact sometimes. And she asked me if that made me uncomfortable. I didn't want to be rude, but also, yes, like very much yes. I asked if she told people this early on, and she said no, but she felt a weirdly safe vibe with me, so she figured she'd just lay it all out. I thanked her for the honesty, because what else do you say when someone confesses they sleep with their ex in between laundry cycles? Then she started describing him, her ex, in way too much detail. Said he was a photographer, made good pancakes, had a very specific laugh, and always picked the right song for any mood. She talked about him like someone still slightly in love, but pretending they've moved past it. I didn't say that out loud. I just nodded and tried to sip my drink as slowly as humanly possible. I asked if she was open to dating seriously again, like outside the apartment dynamic. She said, of course, but in this way that made it sound hypothetical, like the idea of a new relationship was fine in theory, but in practice, not really in motion. Then she flipped the question and asked me if I was the jealous type. I said not really, but I do prefer to date people who don't wake up next to someone they once picked out engagement rings with. She nodded like she respected that. Then she said, "You probably love him though. He's super grounded." Grounded. That's what she called a man she used to be engaged to and now shares a rent-controlled apartment and occasional bed with. I told her I had an early morning and wrapped things up. She hugged me goodbye and said I had good aura energy, which felt like something you say to someone right before deleting their number. When I got home, she texted me a link to a playlist titled Cozy Vibes / Good Company and said she'd love to hang out again sometime, maybe a game night at her place. He's never home on Wednesdays, she added. I never replied. I met Ethan on Bumble, which I only re-downloaded out of boredom one night when my friends flaked on dinner plans. Its profile was straight to the point. No inspirational quotes, no blurry group shots, just a couple of selfies and a photo of him with some boring skyline behind him. The kind that says, "I've been to a rooftop." His bio said he worked in HR for a media company and loves people, which I now realize was a warning, not a personality trait. He was cute in that slightly nerdy, always wears a watch kind of way. Glasses, well-fitted shirts, clean shoes, and that very specific kind of smile you only get from someone who's gotten way too comfortable in work meetings. He messaged first. He used a comma correctly in the first message, which, sadly, made him stand out. We talked for a few days, nothing deep. He seemed smart, maybe a little too interested in my schedule, but I chalked it up to him being organized. We agreed to meet for dinner on a Saturday. He picked the spot, a modern American place with string lights, overpriced flatbreads, and cocktails named after movie characters. The kind of place that makes you feel fancy for ordering fries. He showed up right on time, wearing a dark button-up and a watch that looked too expensive to be casual. He gave me a very professional hug. Not too long, not too close, just enough to feel like a handshake with arms. We got seated near the window. The lighting was soft, music low enough to talk without yelling. For the first 30 minutes, it was just basic stuff. Jobs, family, bad college roommates. He told me how he used to work in advertising but switched to HR because he wanted to be where the power was. That should have been a clue. Instead, I smiled like an idiot and said something about how HR people must be good at reading others. He nodded slowly, like I'd just passed a test. He asked a lot about my job, almost too much. Wanted to know who I worked with, what kind of hours I kept, how many people were on my team. I tried to steer the convo toward movies or music, but he always looped it back to work. Not in a cute, I care about your passions way, more like he was analyzing something. Like my career was a case file. I asked him about the worst part of working in HR, trying to make a joke out of it, and he smiled, leaned back, and said, "Want to hear something kind of wild?" That's never a good sign. He started telling me about this woman he used to work with. Said she was friendly, pretty, but had a bit of an attitude. His words, not mine. He said they got along great at first. Worked on a few projects together, exchanged memes. Basic coworker stuff. Then one day he asked her out. Not in a creepy way. He insisted, just a casual coffee offer. She said no, politely, he said. Said she had a boyfriend, and he accepted it. For like a week. Then, he said, she started acting cold, like not laughing at his jokes during meetings or answering his emails too formally. He said it felt off, so he started documenting things. Little things. Showing up late once or twice. Taking longer lunches. Minor stuff, but enough to build a narrative, as he put it. I thought he was joking. But he kept going. He said that since he was part of the HR department, he had access to certain records, timesheets, emails, complaint forms, and he started quietly putting together a file. He wasn't even subtle about it. He was proud of how thorough he was. She didn't even see it coming, he said, picking up his fork like he'd just complimented his own haircut. We called her in for a performance review and let her go the next month. I must have looked horrified because he immediately backpedaled. Not all the way, just enough to try and spin it. Said she was probably on her way out anyway, and that it wasn't personal, just policy. Then he actually said, "Look, it's not like I made stuff up. I just stopped giving her the benefit of the doubt." I didn't even know how to respond. My brain was just stuck on the fact that this man was telling me, mid-dinner, like it was an interesting little life anecdote, that he used his job to ruin someone's career because she turned him down. I asked him if anyone else knew. He shook his head and said no, that it was one of those things you don't put in a diary. Then he grinned like we were sharing a secret. I excused myself to go to the bathroom. Not because I had to pee, but because I needed to stare at the mirror for a full minute and whisper what the actual hell under my breath. I thought about leaving, like just straight up ditching. But my coat was still at the table and I didn't want to start a scene. I figured I'd power through, then ghost him forever. When I got back to the table, he tried to switch gears. Started talking about his dog, then about travel plans like we hadn't just crossed into full villain backstory territory. I nodded, smiled politely, and declined dessert. When the check came, he paid without saying a word. Not in a nice way. More like he was making a point. Outside the restaurant, he asked if I wanted to come over and keep the night going. I said I had to be up early, which was a lie. He said, "That's cool. I'm sure I'll see you again." I walked away before he could finish the sentence. I blocked his number before I even got home. I still think about that woman sometimes. The one he got fired. I hope she's doing okay. I hope she has a job that doesn't involve dudes like him. This one was doomed from the start, but I didn't see it coming because Nicole had golden retriever energy. Like, all bright eyes and contagious laughter and excessive exclamation points in her texts. She was one of those people who sends you memes at 2 a.m. and then follows it up with "You probably won't think this is funny, but it made me laugh." And honestly, it worked. I liked it. She was cute, super outgoing, talked about loving walks and weird coffee orders, and always had something going on. Hiking, volunteering, dog parks, whatever. We matched on a Wednesday, and by Friday she was already asking when I was free to meet. She didn't want dinner or drinks. She said she was more of a walk and talk kind of person. I respected it. Low pressure, outdoors, fresh air. She suggested meeting on a Sunday afternoon near this cute part of town where everyone has succulents in their window and no one knows how to parallel park. I showed up at the meeting spot, a park entrance, wearing something I thought looked casual but also please still be attracted to me. She was already there, wearing this big scarf even though it was barely chilly, and standing next to this tiny beige dog that looked like a marshmallow with legs. A cavapoo or something. The kind of dog you can't be mad at because it looks like it's about to star in a kid's movie. She waved me over, introduced the dog as Captain, and handed me one of those collapsible coffee cups like we were already a couple running errands. It felt weirdly intimate, but I went with it. The first 20 minutes of the walk were normal. She was funny. I was trying not to trip on uneven pavement while holding my coffee and pretending I liked dog hair in my drink. Captain kept running ahead and sniffing things, and Nicole would call him back in this cutesy voice that made every guy within a 2-block radius turn and look. And yeah, that's when I started to notice something off. Every time a guy walked past us, she'd do this thing where she kind of stood up straighter, flipped her hair, adjusted her jacket. Not once or twice, every single time, like she was posing. I thought maybe I was imagining it, but then we walked by this guy jogging, and she actually said under her breath, "Oh, he's hot," while tugging Captain's leash in his direction. I laughed because I thought it was a joke. It wasn't. Eventually, we sat down on this bench outside a cafe, and she said, totally out of nowhere, "Okay, I should probably just be honest." I blinked. This is rarely a good lead-in. She looked me dead in the face and said, "I only got Captain to meet men." She said it like she was telling me she bought a new plant or tried oat milk for the first time. No shame. Just vibes. I laughed, kind of waiting for the rest of the sentence, but she doubled down. Said she read an article about how women with small dogs are more likely to get approached by men, especially in parks, and that she'd wanted to get back into dating after a bad breakup, so she adopted one. Literally for that purpose. She paused to give Captain a little head pat, like he was her wingman instead of her pet. I asked if it worked, and she grinned. "Oh yeah, I had more conversations in the last 2 months than the last 2 years." Then she casually added, "I actually planned our route today to pass by my ex-neighborhood." That one took me a second to process. She pointed at the next block over and said he lived somewhere down there. Then she said, "I try to walk by at least twice a week, sometimes with a new guy. Just to remind him what he's missing." I sat there, coffee halfway in my mouth, trying to figure out if this was some kind of social experiment or if I had just become an accidental pawn in her post-breakup revenge tour. She kept talking like this was normal behavior. Said she didn't stop and stare or anything, just liked being visible. And she laughed and said one time he came out to get his mail and she pretended not to see him, even though she was holding eye contact and petting Captain like she was filming a commercial. I asked her if she was still into him. She said no, absolutely not, and then described in vivid detail what his new girlfriend looked like and how basic she was. The vibe was officially cooked. I tried to steer things back to something light, like music or weekend plans, but she wasn't done. She told me she actually had a ranking system for dog walks, like how many men stopped, what kinds of compliments she got, whether or not Captain seemed to attract older or younger guys depending on the route. She said I scored pretty high because I complimented her shoes and offered to hold Captain's leash when she had to reheat her scarf. I didn't even know what to say. I was trying to be polite, but at this point I felt like a piece of bait that got invited on a date without knowing I was part of the lure. We finished the walk in weird silence. She was still smiling, totally unbothered, and Captain was just living his tiny marshmallow life. We said goodbye, and she gave me a hug that felt like a handshake disguised as affection. Then she said, "Let's do this again. There's a different route that goes by a farmer's market and my ex's favorite taco truck." I nodded, said, "We'll see," and left. She texted me later a photo of Captain sleeping with the caption, "He liked you." I didn't respond. I'm sure he likes everyone. Logan was one of those people who looked better in motion than in photos. His dating profile didn't really do him justice. His smile was kind of crooked, and his hair always looked like it had been recently tousled on purpose, but in person he had that annoying kind of charisma that makes you feel like you're the only one in the room. We matched during some weird midnight swipe spiral, and he messaged me something like, "You look like the kind of person who argues at trivia night," which made me laugh way harder than it should have. We started texting, and honestly, the banter was solid. He was clever, fast, and he didn't text like he was trying to negotiate a car deal. We talked about books, stand-up comedy, how much iced coffee is too much, and what we each do in a zombie apocalypse. It was easy. We set a plan to meet for dinner at this hole-in-the-wall Mexican spot that he claimed had the best carnitas in the entire hemisphere. I was skeptical but also craving tacos, so I went with it. He was already sitting at a table when I walked in, scrolling through something on his phone and sipping a Gyarados like he was born doing it. He stood up, hugged me like we'd known each other longer than 2 weeks of messages, and launched straight into making fun of the restaurant's really fancy water glasses. I was into it. I thought, okay, this might actually be a fun one. Dinner started off strong. The food slapped, the conversation was loud and messy, and we laughed through most of it. He told me about his awful college roommate who only ate raw onions and how he once accidentally joined a knitting club because he thought it was a political discussion group. I told him about my short-lived career as a barista where I once served someone an extra hot iced latte. We were vibing, like really vibing. And then, mid-bite into his burrito, he said, "Can I ask where you stand politically?" I kind of froze for a second. Not because I was hiding anything, but because you just never know where that's gonna go. I told him, pretty casually, that I leaned left. Human rights, social programs, climate change, all the greatest hits. He nodded slowly and said, "Interesting," which is never a good follow-up. And he said, "I'm actually the opposite, like very much the opposite." I blinked. I asked if he meant conservative or just contrarian for the sake of it, and he laughed and said, "I'm kind of the final boss of contrarians." Okay. Then he kept going. Told me that he actually prefers dating people who disagree with him, that it's kind of a challenge he enjoys. He said that dating people with the same views was boring, and that he likes the game of it. I asked what game, and he straight up said, breaking people down. Not in a fun, banter kind of way. He said it like it was a sport. He said he enjoys the process of poking holes in what people believe until they start to second-guess themselves. That if someone can't defend their ideas after a few dates, maybe they never really believed them in the first place. He said he didn't want a partner who just parroted what they read online. He wanted someone who would earn his respect by surviving the debate. And I just sat there like, what kind of Hunger Games nonsense did I just walk into? I asked him if he was trying to change people or just test them. He said, "A little of both," and smiled like it was a charming personality quirk, like he was doing people a favor by intellectually challenging them into submission. I asked if he'd ever dated someone with similar beliefs, and he said, "Once. It was the most boring 3 weeks of my life." He told me about one girl who was super liberal and how he slowly got her to see things differently until she started questioning feminism and vaccines. He said it like he was bragging about getting a high score on a video game. I asked him if she still talks to him. He laughed and said, "No, but that's kind of the point." It was at that exact moment I realized the whole dinner had been a setup. He didn't come here to have a fun date. He came here for target practice. He started throwing out buzzwords and weird statistics, trying to bait me into a debate I never agreed to. And don't get me wrong, I can argue. I can go full verbal judo if I want to. But this wasn't that. This was a trap disguised as a conversation. Like he wanted me to say something slightly wrong so he could pounce on it and prove a point. I told him I wasn't really in the mood to have a political argument over salsa and lime wedges. He said that's exactly what some would say when they don't know what they're talking about. I put my fork down and just stared at him for a second. He was so smug, so satisfied, like he thought I'd be impressed by how provocative and bold he was being. He genuinely thought this was flirting. I told him I was gonna head out early. He looked surprised for a split second and then said, "That's fine. I figured you weren't gonna be able to keep up." I said, "It's not that I can't keep up. It's that I don't play with people who think relationships are battlefields." He said, "You're just mad because you didn't get to win." I left. Paid for my half at the counter. Told the host the food was amazing, but the guy I was with was less than stellar. He texted me later, some smug one-liner like, "Hiss, we're not aligned, huh?" I blocked him. I still think about how many people probably went out with him and didn't realize they were being studied like a lab experiment. Or worse, how many did start changing their minds because he made them feel dumb for having them. All right, so Hannah. We matched on a Sunday night when I was laying on the floor of my room, trying to decide between ordering Thai food or confronting my life choices. She had this effortless kind of cool in her photos, graphic tees, messy hair, eyeliner that looked like it was applied recklessly, but still turned out perfect. Her profile said she was into true crime podcasts, almond croissants, and radical honesty, which at the time sounded edgy in a fun way. Looking back, it was more like a soft warning I decided to ignore. We talked for a few days. She was sharp, like really sharp. Sarcastic, fast replies, always a little unpredictable. She roasted me for saying I like pumpkin spice lattes, and then followed it up with a very serious debate about whether figs are an elite fruit or just ugly raisins. It was a weird combo of chaotic and flirty that made me want to meet her in person just to see what else was hiding under the surface. She picked this weird little bar with no sign, which she said was too cool to advertise. It had low lights, velvet bar stools, and a chalkboard menu with drink names like Lavender Rejection and Corpse in the Library. She was already sitting at the bar when I got there, sipping something that looked like melted smoke and had a single flower floating on top. She hugged me, commented on my shoes, and immediately launched into a story about how her neighbor named their baby Banjo. No warm-up, no small talk, just full-speed Hannah. We ordered drinks, found a booth in the corner, and for a while, it was actually a pretty great time. She told me about her terrible old boss who used to schedule meetings at 7:45 in the morning just to flex. And I told her about a time I accidentally locked myself inside a friend's bathroom at a party and had to text someone to come rescue me. It was relaxed, fun, until we got into the whole dating history thing. She asked how many people I'd dated in the last year. I gave her a ballpark number, nothing crazy. Then I asked the same, and she grinned and said, "Hard to say, but I've got a list." I laughed. I thought she meant like a mental list or maybe some messy note in her phone of people she dated. But no, she reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and opened her notes app. Tapped a folder titled Blacklist, local, and she showed it to me. It was a full-on spreadsheet. Names, locations, brief summaries, actual color coding. Some names were highlighted, some were bolded. Some had entire bullet point paragraphs under them. I asked what the list was for, and she said it was her way of tracking patterns. Said it helped her spot red flags faster and avoid wasting time. I asked if it was just for fun, and she looked at me like I'd asked if gravity was optional. "No," she said. "It's serious. You think I'm gonna keep going into dates blind?" I tried to read one of the entries and she didn't even stop me. She let me scroll. One guy was blacklisted for talking about his mom too much. Possible unresolved attachment issues. Another for ordering a second beer without asking if I wanted one. Another for bad grammar and texts after the date. And another one used the word epic unironically. She wasn't even joking. Not a trace of irony in her face. I asked how many people were on the list. She said 61. Not all first dates. Some were people she casually saw. Others were short flings. A few were full-on relationships. All had been evaluated and logged. I asked if I was going to end up on it. She said, "We'll see." Then she tapped the screen, opened a new note, and titled it with my name and the date. I was halfway through a sip of my drink and almost choked. She said it wasn't a bad thing. It just helped her reflect. That if I made it past 3 dates, the note might stay as a positive reference instead of a warning. Then she winked and said, like Yelp, but for emotional intelligence. I didn't even know how to respond. I asked if she shared the list with anyone. She said only her best friend and her therapist, and occasionally my cousin when he's dating in the same zip code. The rest of the date was fine. I guess I couldn't focus. Every word I said, I kept wondering if she was mentally formatting it into bullet points. Was I too talkative? Too reserved? Should I be worried that I said I text my mom once a week? Was that going under mom issues? She didn't act weird about anything after that. In fact, she was still laughing and telling me stories about her chaotic friend who tried to date 2 people with the same name at once. But the whole time I could feel it. The invisible clipboard between us. The quiet note-taking I couldn't see. When we said goodbye, she gave me a very solid hug and said, "This was nice. I'll let you know if I want a second round." Like I was a wine sample or something. I walked back to my car with a strange feeling that I had just finished an audition I didn't know I was in. She texted me the next day saying she had fun and that was at least a B+ so far. I didn't respond. Not because I hated her or anything. Honestly, she was kind of fascinating in a chaotic, neutral way, but I just didn't want to be someone else's data point. I picture my name still sitting there in her notes app, maybe updated with something like "didn't text back." Possible commitment issues. Zach was a last-minute match. Like one of those I'm about to delete the app, so why not swipe right on this chaos? Situations. His photos were all over the place. Shirtless beach shot, one with a surfboard, one where he was definitely at Burning Man, and one blurry selfie that looked like it was taken from a moving bicycle. His bio was some quote about embracing discomfort and living in the moment, which should have tipped me off, but I was bored, hungry, and honestly just curious what someone like that was like in person. We matched on a Thursday, and he asked me to grab drinks the very next night. Normally that would feel rushed, but I said yes. He picked this bar that doubled as a kombucha tap room and had beanbags in the back room. I should have known. So Friday rolls around, and I get there a little early, which I instantly regretted. The place smelled like fermented lemon and regret. I sat at the bar scrolling through my phone, sipping a drink that tasted like carbonated apple cider vinegar, while 10 minutes ticked by, then 15, then 20. Zach finally strolled in 25 minutes late, wearing sunglasses indoors and smiling like he'd just remembered something funny from a dream. I stood up, he hugged me way too long and said, "Sorry I'm late, I had to reset my brain after the last meeting I had." I asked what he did for work, and he just said, "Freelance everything." Cool. We sat down in a corner. He was jittery in a weird way, not anxious, but more like his body was trying to catch up with his thoughts. His eyes were red and glassy, and he kept chewing the inside of his cheek like it owed him money. I asked if he was okay just lightly, and he laughed and said, "Yeah, I always microdose on first dates. It helps me read energy better." I blinked and waited for a punchline. He just sipped his drink, still smiling. I asked him if he was serious, and he nodded like he just told me he takes vitamin D in the morning. "Yeah, it's not a big deal," he said. It helps me spot weak personalities early on. People who can't handle unpredictability usually aren't good partners. I sat back and stared at him. He was explaining this like it was a personality test. He told me he'd taken a small amount of psilocybin earlier that day, just enough to soften the ego, whatever that meant. He said he does it regularly, on first dates, on interviews, sometimes before calling his mom. It keeps things honest. I said, And what happens if the date isn't going well? He shrugged. I just leave. Energy doesn't lie. At that point, I honestly didn't know if I was impressed by the audacity or just deeply concerned. He was clearly high. Like, I don't care how micro your dose is. His pupils looked like black holes, and he'd been staring at the reflection in his spoon for 5 minutes. I tried changing the subject. Asked him about music, movies, anything. He told me he didn't consume media because it was other people's projections of their fears, and said he preferred to live in direct experience, which apparently meant going to music festivals alone and once spending 3 days in the woods with no food to feel hunger honestly. At one point, I asked him what he looked for in a relationship, and he said, someone with strong boundaries and zero fear, which was wild, considering he didn't ask if I was okay with him showing up under the influence, and then low-key evaluating my soul like he was running a vibe check on a spiritual plane. Then, completely unprompted, he asked me if I ever felt like my brain was a guest in someone else's body. I said no. He nodded slowly and said, yeah, you're definitely a grounded type. He kept saying things like that, you're a fire energy, or you have moonwalker posture. I didn't know what half of it meant, and I think he liked that. Like he was trying to keep me off balance just enough so he'd feel like the one in control. I asked if he always took something before first dates, and he said, not always. Sometimes I go sober just to see how other people act when I'm totally clear, but that's more of a second date experiment. Second date experiment. I looked at the time and realized I'd only been sitting there for 35 minutes. It felt like a week. He was now tracing the condensation on his glass with his finger, talking about fluid timelines, and how traditional dating apps were capitalist love traps. I nodded, said I had an early morning, and stood up. He didn't seem offended, just said, fair. I figured we'd either click or combust. Then he gave me a two-handed handshake and said, thanks for letting me see your field. I don't know what that means. I left that bar faster than I'd ever walked out of anywhere. On the way home, I kept checking my phone expecting him to text something cryptic or wild, but nothing came. Silence, which was honestly more unnerving. A few days later, he updated his Bumble profile. I only know because a friend sent it to me. It now says, if you can't handle altered states, we won't vibe. No kidding. Megan's profile looked like it was put together by someone who treated dating apps like a part-time job. All her photos were perfectly framed. Bookstore selfies, a mountain summit, or holding a glass of wine with a sunset in the background. It was giving thesis on how to be photogenic. Her bio had a quote about how alignment is more important than attraction. And at the time, I thought that just meant she was tired of time wasters, which fair. I was tired too. We started talking after she messaged me first. She said she appreciated that my profile didn't have any fish or car selfies, which, yeah, low bar, but I'll take it. She typed in full sentences, no lol or weird one-word replies, and honestly, she had main character energy. She'd say stuff like, I'm not dating to explore. I'm dating to decide. Again, intense, but I figured maybe that just meant she knew what she wanted. She picked a place, a quiet cafe near a botanical garden that was so quiet it felt like the staff had been told not to speak above a whisper. I got there early and grabbed a table in the corner, assuming we'd be having a chill get-to-know-you conversation over overpriced tea. Instead, Megan walked in holding a binder. A literal 3-ring binder, white, organized, tabs. She smiled, hugged me quickly, sat down, and said, okay, so I brought something a little different. My stomach dropped. My first thought was she brought a resume or something. But no, she opened it up, revealing color-coded dividers, printed pages, and a red pen clipped to the front pocket like this was a college midterm. I must have looked confused because she added, I created a compatibility system during the pandemic. It saved me so much time. You'll see. She flipped to the first section titled Core Values and pulled out a sheet with questions printed in 12-point font and double-spaced. The first one was, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is personal growth to you? I blinked. She clicked her pen. Go ahead. I kind of laughed, thinking this was a quirky bit or some icebreaker thing, but she was fully serious, like not a joke in sight. I said something like, well, 8. And she nodded, wrote it down, and said, what does personal growth mean to you in practical terms? We were off. The next question was about conflict resolution. Then came communication style. Then relationship with parents, long-term financial planning, views on monogamy and attachment theory, political deal breakers, and whether or not I believed in past lives. She flipped pages between questions, nodding, making tiny notes in the margins like non-committal or strong reaction to money equals insecurity. I asked if she did this with every date. She said, not every date, just the ones with potential. So, I had potential. Lucky me. I asked if I could see the binder for a second and she hesitated, then handed it over. I flipped through it and realized it wasn't just blank forms. It had filled out entries from previous guys, like full pages. Notes, rankings, crossouts. There was even a printed chart comparing attachment styles and conflict habits of top 3 matches. She had used bar graphs. I'm not joking. One guy's page had a giant red X through it and a note that said, thinks compromise equals defeat. Avoid. I asked if those guys knew she kept this stuff. She shrugged and said, not exactly, but I anonymize it. Yeah, I'm sure Daniel, the 34-year-old who believes in polyamory and works in data science, would never know that's him. The longer I sat there, the more I realized I was being interviewed. Not like in a flirty, what's your favorite pizza topping way, but like I was applying for the role of life partner and she was HR, legal, and quality control all in one. I asked her what happened to just having a conversation and seeing where things go. She said that's too passive. That people waste years chasing butterflies instead of building structure. She said, I'm not here for vibes. I'm here for evidence. I half joked, do I get a score at the end? And she flipped to a final page that literally said compatibility summary, subjective notes, and said, we can do that if you'd like. I tried to smile, but I was sweating a little, not for nerves from trying not to laugh or cry. I wasn't sure yet. At some point I just said, hey, I think I'm more of a vibe guy, less of a rubric person. And she looked genuinely disappointed, like she just realized she'd wasted a good pen on me. She said, that's okay. Not everyone's in alignment. We wrapped up soon after. She packed up her binder, tightened the clip, and offered to walk out with me. She didn't ask for a second date. She didn't have to. She'd already filed me away under nice but lax framework. I got a text from her later that night. It was one sentence. Thanks for participating. Best of luck building a self-aware connection. Participating. Not dating. Not hanging out. Participating. Like I'd been part of the study she forgot to debrief. And that was that. Drake matched with me on a Wednesday. One of those midweek matches where you're bored, slightly annoyed by your own life, and everyone looks hotter than they probably are in person. His profile was low effort, but not in a bad way. Just 3 solid photos, one with a dog, always a win, one hiking somewhere that looked expensive, and one mirror selfie that wasn't giving too much thirst trap, but just enough to show he worked out. His bio said, not here for games, just good conversation and maybe something real, which is classic cryptic guy copy-paste energy, but fine, whatever. He sent a polite, hey, how's your week? Message, and I responded because it was 9:30 p.m. and I was eating dry cereal straight from the box. We vibed for a bit, enough for him to ask if I wanted to grab drinks that Friday. It was quick, but not weirdly fast. He said he was busy this weekend after Friday, so I figured he had a full schedule or maybe just didn't like Sunday dates. I said sure. He picked this bar that was weirdly trendy for how small it was, like 5 tables, a bar top, and mood lighting that made everyone look slightly more attractive than usual. I got there a little early, grabbed a spot, and waited. He showed up 10 minutes later, wearing a black hoodie and jeans, smelled vaguely like cologne and regret, and smiled like he'd just convinced himself it wasn't a bad idea to be there. He gave me this warm, familiar hug, not too long, not too quick, just enough to feel like he was trying to set the tone. We started off strong. Easy convo, mutual jokes about our worst dates. Mine involved a guy who asked me if I was emotionally expensive, and some random shared opinions about how espresso martinis are overrated. He was charming in a way that felt calm, not performative. No weird pickup lines, just thoughtful questions and low-key compliments. He talked about his dog, a little about his job and something vaguely tech-related, and said he was trying to figure out what comes next. Not in a midlife crisis way, more like someone who just got a promotion they didn't want. Things took a turn right after the second round of drinks. The bar was starting to fill up, music was louder, and we were sitting closer. He got a little quieter, less jokey, and looked at me in this very specific way, like he was about to tell me something that might ruin the vibe, but he decided to do it anyway. He leaned forward a little and said, "Okay, and I should probably tell you something now." I braced myself. I thought he was going to say he had a kid, or that he was moving, or that he used to be in jail. Something big but manageable. Instead, he said, "I'm married." I blinked, thought I misheard him. He repeated it. "I'm married. I'm not supposed to be on here." Then he added, "But she's out of town right now. I don't know. I needed to feel normal for a night." I was fully frozen, just sitting there with a half-drunk gin and tonic while this man, who up to this point had been completely normal, was now telling me he was breaking whatever deal he had with someone who probably trusted him with their life. He kept talking, said they had an understanding, that they'd been through a rough patch and agreed to take emotional space without calling it a separation. I asked if she knew he was on dating apps. He said no, but also she probably suspects it. I asked him what exactly he was looking for tonight. He said, "Just this, a conversation, a drink, something that doesn't feel like I'm drowning in routine." He said he missed getting to know people, that he missed the feeling of being new to someone. I asked if he was planning to tell me it all, and he said yes, eventually. He wanted to see if there was a vibe first, and then feel it out, like it was a test run for his moral flexibility. I sat there quiet for a second, mostly just trying not to toss my drink in his lap. I wasn't even mad in the big dramatic way. I was just exhausted. It's a weird kind of betrayal when someone lies to you in real time and smiles while doing it. He said he wasn't trying to hook up, that this wasn't about cheating, just about feeling real again. I told him being real usually involves telling the truth at the beginning, not halfway through a mojito. He nodded, took that one on the chin. So I was probably the kind of person who doesn't settle for half-truths. I told him I was the kind of person who doesn't waste time on married men. He said fair enough. I paid for my own drink, got up, and told him good luck. He said thanks, not sarcastically, like genuinely. He even offered me his umbrella, which was weirdly nice and also made everything worse. I said I was good and walked out into the drizzle, phone already in hand, blocking his number while mentally uninstalling the app for the 5th time that year. He texted me the next morning, just one line. "I meant everything I said, even if I shouldn't have said it to you." I didn't respond. Lily was probably the most interesting person I matched with in a while, and I don't mean that in a good or bad way. Just straight up interesting. Her profile felt like it belonged to someone who wrote poetry about other people's breakups and had a favorite brand of incense. She had pink hair in one photo, blue in another, and a third where she was wearing a fur coat in the middle of the desert. No explanation. Her bio said, "Retired internet personality. Not here for a relationship. Just here for the stories." That should have been my clue. I read it, laughed, and thought, cool, someone funny. But nah, she wasn't joking. We matched on a Monday night, and she sent the first message. "You look like the kind of guy who's nice to baristas, but would ghost someone for using the wrong emoji." I laughed, said something sarcastic back, and we ended up texting for hours. It wasn't flirty in a romantic way. It was fast, weird, and oddly philosophical. She asked me if I'd ever had a dream that changed my opinion about someone. I said I once dreamed I was in a sword fight with my middle school crush, and she replied, "See, that means something." We made plans to meet up Friday at this Raymond bar she picked, one of those places that plays loud punk music and puts chili oil on everything, even the water probably. I showed up on time. She showed up 10 minutes late, wearing a thrifted leather jacket and carrying a notebook, which she set on the table like it was a normal accessory. She ordered steak for the table before I could say anything and immediately asked me what I was like in 2016. I said, "Worse," and she grinned. We started eating, and she barely touched her ramen. She was more into the conversation, asking questions like, "Have you ever been in love with someone who didn't exist? And what do you think your exes say about you behind your back?" It was fun in the way that makes you forget to check your phone, but also kind of makes you feel like you're being profiled. About halfway through, she leaned back, sipped her drink, and said, "Okay, so full disclosure, you're probably going in the book." I thought she was being dramatic, like maybe she just meant I'd inspire a tweet or a group chat message. But nope, she pulled out the notebook and showed me a page titled Volume 3. Mid-tier men and what they taught me. Underneath that, a bullet point list. My name, the room and place. A few notes from earlier in the conversation. She'd been taking mental notes and physical notes. I asked her what the book was about, and she said, a memoir, kind of more like a documentary of my dating life through a lens of economic and emotional absurdity. I asked if she was serious. She nodded and said, I used to run a sugar baby blog, real following. Anonymous at first, but now just go on dates like this to collect character studies. I asked her if she was still a sugar baby, and she laughed and said, retired, or rebranded, depends how you look at it. She told me the blog had been a full-blown operation, advice columns, meetup guides, how to read a man based on his wine order. She said she made good money and even better content. Then she said, but this memoir is more personal. These are the dates where I'm not trying to get paid. I'm trying to get something real. She paused, not romantically, just, emotionally usable. I sat there, halfway through my bowl, trying to decide if I was flattered or just straight up a prop. She flipped through the notebook again, tapping her pen on the page. Don't worry, she said. You're coming off decently so far. Not cringe. Just maybe a little too well adjusted. I asked if she ever actually connected with anyone like beyond collecting stories. She said, connection's overrated, but good material, that's forever. She told me one guy cried on the first date, and she turned it into a 4-page chapter called Tears and Tapas. Another tried to get her into crypto mid-brunch, and she titled that one The Blockchain of Emotional Neglect. She said she always changes the names, but the settings and dialogue, pretty much word for word. I said, so people just go out with you and end up as literary content. She smiled, raised her say glass, and said, only if they're interesting enough. At that point, I wasn't sure if I wanted to leave or become the most iconic chapter in her entire memoir. I told her, just let me know if I get a dramatic arc. And she said, only if you mess up by dessert. We didn't even get dessert. She paid her half, packed up her notebook, and said, this was better than expected. Good rhythm, some decent introspection. I'll text you if I need follow-ups. And then she dipped. She didn't text me, obviously. A week later, I found her Instagram through a random rabbit hole and saw a post of a black and white rimmed photo with the caption, even the ones who aren't tragic are still useful. I guess I'm in the book now. Kevin seemed normal, and honestly, that's why I said yes to the date. He seemed like one of the very few people on the app who wasn't posing next to a tiger or using quotes from Fight Club like it was still edgy. He had this calm, neutral-looking smile in all 3 of his photos, one with him holding a coffee, another standing in front of what looked like an art installation, and one mirror selfie that didn't scream thirst trap but was clearly chosen with care. His bio just said, data guy, probably overthinking this app. Let's get a drink and talk about everything. It was simple, no red flags, no weird sentence fragments, no mention of astrology or gin routines. I figured, sure, I'll bite. We talked for a few days. Nothing intense, but not totally surface level either. He was consistent, responded with actual sentences, and didn't hit me with that energy where you can tell someone's half watching Netflix and half texting 6 people. I told him I liked spicy food and couldn't parallel park. He said he hated mayonnaise and liked walking through bookstores without buying anything. It wasn't fireworks, but it was solid, comfortable. A good enough lead up to say yes when he asked if I wanted to grab coffee that Saturday afternoon. He picked this spot in the Arts District, a cute little place with exposed brick, overpriced ice lattes, and employees who all looked like they were in bands. I got there a little early, ordered a drink, and sat down at a window table. He walked in right on time, wearing a navy blue hoodie and jeans. It looked exactly like his photos, which in itself is rare. He hugged me hello, said I looked better than my pictures. And I think I said something dumb like you look like you have a good tax record, because my brain short circuits when I get complimented. We sat down and started talking. First 10 minutes, totally normal. Jobs, random food opinions, our shared hatred of small talk in elevators. Then he asked if my roommate still had that loud little dog. I laughed and said yes, thinking maybe I'd mentioned that over text, even though I couldn't remember doing it. But whatever, it didn't seem weird. Then, a few minutes later, he asked if I still hated oat milk. I froze a little because I hate oat milk, like irrationally so, but I hadn't brought that up either. I would have remembered because I usually explain how I think it tastes like warm glue, and nobody forgets that kind of opinion. He kept talking, though, like it was nothing. Then he joked about how I sent someone money for boba emergencies. And that's when the alarms started going off in my head. That was a Venmo transaction I made last week. Sent my friend Cam $7 for boba and put boba emergency as the note with a red siren emoji because I was being dumb and dramatic. That wasn't in a post. I didn't mention it anywhere. It was just there, on my Venmo feed, which is apparently public. I looked at him, raised an eyebrow, and asked, "Wait, how do you know that?" He grinned, not nervously, more like he was proud, like I just caught him doing something clever. He said, "Okay, I kind of Googled you before this, just a little." Just a little. I stared at him. He didn't flinch. He looked genuinely pleased with himself. I asked him what he meant by Googled, and he said, "I found your last name from your Instagram handle in the app, and then just did a quick search. You got a pretty distinct name, so it wasn't hard. Then I checked your Venmo. It's public, by the way." He said that last part like it was my fault for not locking it down. Like I'd accidentally left my diary on a park bench, and now he was just casually flipping through it with his iced coffee. He kept going. Said it wasn't a big deal. That he always does a light background check before meeting someone. And it's just smart. I asked if he realized how creepy it sounded, and he said, "No, it's all public. I didn't hack anything." That's the part that stuck with me. The way he kept defending it like it was research. Like I should be impressed by his efficiency and not deeply weirded out that he knew what neighborhood I lived in and what snacks I Venmo my friends for. I asked him what else he knew. He shrugged and said, "Not much. Just your job, the name of your roommate, your Spotify. Oh, and I read a couple old tweets. You were kind of wild in 2017. I wanted to disappear to the brick wall behind me. He laughed and said, "I just like having context. Dating's weird. People lie, but their internet footprint doesn't." I didn't even know how to respond to that. I told him there's a difference between curiosity and digital stalking, and he rolled his eyes like I was being dramatic. Said it wasn't like he showed up at my job. Yet. I made some excuse about needing to leave soon. He nodded, calm as ever, and said, "It's cool. I just thought it'd be fun to show up with a head start. Saves time." I paid for my coffee, even though he offered to cover it. I didn't want him knowing my card brand or some weird thing I hadn't thought to make private. I walked out feeling gross, not because he'd done anything illegal, but because he acted like it was totally normal to show up already knowing things about me I hadn't chosen to share. Later that night, he texted me something like, "Sorry if I came on too strong. You're cool though. Hope we can still hang out." I blocked the number, made all my social media private, and deleted my public Venmo history. Then I texted my friends and said, "You won't believe what I just lived through." They believed it. I met Alyssa during one of those rare phases where I told myself I was going to be more open-minded with dating. Try new types of people, not just the sarcastic ones with nose piercings and mild commitment issues. Her profile was sweet, kind of plain, but in a refreshing way. No weird filters. A lot of smiles. One photo of her on a boat, one with a dog that wasn't hers, I asked, and one where she was baking something that looked like it belonged in a magazine. Her bio said, "Looking for someone to build a simple life with. Bonus points if you can cook eggs right." I can, so I swiped right. She messaged me first. Asked what I would bring to a potluck if I only had 15 minutes to prepare. I said a box of donuts and charm. She replied with a laughing emoji and said, "Solid answer. Better than the guy who said napkins." She was quick-witted, not too heavy, but not trying to be ironic every second like so many people are now. I figured I could use a date like that, one where I didn't feel like I was on stage the whole time. We decided on dinner at this cute Italian spot with mismatched chairs, low lights, and old-school jazz playing quietly in the background. She showed up wearing this red sweater that made her look like she'd walked out of a greeting card. Hair tied back, simple necklace, no overdone makeup, just clean. I don't know. She looked like someone who could assemble IKEA furniture without getting mad. From the second we sat down, the conversation just flowed. We talked about bad first jobs. Hers was wrapping presents at a department store during Christmas. Mine was handing out free samples at a grocery store in a lobster costume. Favorite breakfasts, and how we both secretly judge people by how they treat waitstaff. She asked about my siblings. I asked about her hometown. It felt effortless. She listened, actually listened, made eye contact, nodded in the right places, laughed at the dumb jokes, and asked follow-ups that didn't feel scripted. If this had been a montage in a movie, this would have been the part where the music swells and the audience leans and okay, maybe this one's it. Dinner flew by. We ordered dessert. Shared one, this lemon tart thing, she said. Tasted like sunshine, but humble. And then, with a straight face while wiping a crumb from the corner of her mouth, she said, "Can I ask you something kind of serious?" I said sure, thinking maybe she was gonna ask if I'd ever been in love or what I wanted long term. Normal serious stuff. Nope. She reached into her bag and pulled out a photo. A printed photo. Like an actual glossy 4x6 from Walgreens or something. She slid across the table toward me and said, "This is me as a baby." I blinked. There I was, staring down at a picture of a very cute, chubby-cheeked infant wrapped in a blanket covered in ducks. I thought it was maybe a joke or part of some weird game. But she wasn't smiling. She was watching me for a reaction. I laughed mostly out of confusion and said, "Wow, what a blow-up." She smiled finally and said, "Okay. So, if this works out, what would you name our first kid?" I thought she was messing with me. She wasn't. She was completely serious. She even followed it up with, "I'm not saying I'm picking out baby names on the first date, but it's fun to know what kind of names people like. It shows how they see the world." And I get it. Some people like those conversations. Some people are planners. But we were literally still wiping lemon tart off our forks. I hadn't even paid the bill yet. And this woman was asking me to brainstorm names for a theoretical child based on a hypothetical relationship built on a single shared entree and a 2-hour conversation about cereal preferences. I tried to keep it light. I said something dumb like, "Well, I was always partial to rocket ship, but it's probably not good for a resume." She didn't laugh. She said, "No, seriously. Would you want something classic, trendy, biblical, ethereal?" I said, "I haven't thought that far ahead." She nodded like that was disappointing but understandable. Then she said she had a list on her notes app and that she'd eliminated 3 names this month already because someone she knew ruined them. She even offered to show me. I said I was good. She put the baby photo back in her purse like it was a business card. The rest of the dessert was awkward, not in a rude way. Just this quiet realization that we weren't on the same wavelength. She was already projecting some kind of story onto us, and I was still trying to remember if I locked my car before I came inside. I asked her how often she brings up baby names on first dates. She said, not always, but if the vibe feels right. Apparently, the vibe felt right. We walked out to the street together. I thanked her for dinner. She thanked me for being open. I nodded, unsure if I just failed a test or passed the first round of auditions. She hugged me. I got in my car and sat there for a second before pulling away, just staring at the steering wheel like, what was that? She texted me later that night a baby name. No context, just a name. Then a second message, "You kind of look like the kind of guy who'd pick something like this." I didn't respond. I just closed the app, set my phone down, and made eggs for dinner at 11:30 p.m. while listening to an old podcast episode about why first dates should come with waivers. And that was Alyssa.